Deborah Little.
And I'm Anna Dallaher.
And this is the Reclaiming the Garden podcast. Today, we're not quite doing a Bible deep dive, but we are talking about the Bible. We're talking about women in the Bible, specifically.
Yeah, and one thing that we want to make clear is we wrote down all the women in the Bible. We're probably not going to get to every single woman in the Bible. If you want to, there's someone you wanted to learn more about and we didn't mention it, let us know. Maybe we'll do a part 2 to this episode at some point. But one thing that I just want to open up with, which I think is really cool, is a lot of times you hear people saying that you need to be the Proverbs 31 woman. And a lot of the women in the Bible, at least the ones that are a huge part of just the story of the divine and the Jesus story itself, is they are not Proverbs 31 women, and we are definitely going to be going into that.
You know, let's start off with the person who absolutely destroys that stereotype. Let's talk about Jael.
Yes.
So I feel like in the progressive Christian community, she's talked about a lot, particularly, kind of popularized by writers like Rachel Held Evans, and, I don't know if y'all follow the podcast Couch Community on Instagram. They're really cool. Check them out. They posted when they posted about their Women in the Bible episode. They had the photo of this skull with a tent peg. Jael is a woman who drove a tent peg through a man's skull, through the skull of one of the enemies of Israel. She specifically, the way that she does it, she kind of uses her feminine wiles to charm him, and she invites him in and sort of gives him wine to drink or something. She gives him something to drink. It's after a long battle, he needs to sleep and everything. And then as he's sleeping, she fucking goes and drives a tent peg in his skull. What a gentle and quiet spirit, right?
Right. And this story takes place...
And in this story, she's praised. She is not seen as being an evil person. There's after it, is it Deborah who sings a song? I think it's Deborah who sings a song, or someone. It's
oh yes, it's the song of Deborah. It's in Judges 5:24-26. And for people that maybe aren't as familiar with the Bible, Judges is kind of like the Game of Thrones book of the Bible. And the passages: extolled above women be Jael, extolled above women in the tent. He asked for water, she gave him milk. She brought him cream in a lordly dish. She stretched forth her hand to the nail, her right hand to the workman's hammer, and she smote Sisera, she crushed his head, she crashed through and transfixed his temples. I love that description so much. It's poetic and it's descriptive, and that's why I love it.
Yes.
But again, one example of someone who is not considered the meek, demure housewife I think...
Do we just want to maybe read part of Proverbs 31 women so people know what we're talking about if they have no idea? Let me...
Yes, absolutely.
So it starts in verse 10, this part, the part of Proverbs 31 that's about a woman. Though, of course, I think the first part of it is also important, because actually it starts off with something that his mother taught him, some wisdom that his mother taught him. By him, I mean the words of King Lemuel, it says. And so this actually, it's separated, but I mean, this is all a part of the same oracle. Starting in verse 10, a capable wife who can find. She is far more precious than jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. She seeks wool and flax and works with willing hands. She is like ships of the merchant. She brings her food from far away. She rises while it is still night and provides food for her household and tasks for her servant girls. She considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hands she plants a vineyard. She girds herself with strength and makes her arms strong. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. She puts her hands to the distaff, and her hands to the and her hands hold the spindle. She opens her hand to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. She is not okay. Honestly, this it goes a long time. A cool verse, I guess, in here: strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs at the time to come. Various things about how she runs her household. Her children rise up and call her happy. Her husband too, and he praises her. So yeah, I mean, and you see, evangelicals have taken this passage and have used it as a sort of checklist for what a wife should be, even though that is not what it is.
Not at all. It's how to like praise your wife, because like these are the things that she does, and this is how you praise her and exalt her and everything. It's not a checklist of how a woman should be, or biblical femininity, which I always think is such a weird talking point that a lot of women's ministries bring up.
Anyway, so, we were just talking about Jael, and, Deborah is also part of that story, and she is, I think she's the only female judge in the book of Judges. The judges were these leaders that God called up from Israel to help lead the nation in a time of a lot of bad shit going on. Lots of wars and such. And yeah, she was the military leader for a period of time, and she was the one who helped defeat the army that Sisera was leading. And
the Canaanite army.
What's interesting is that there is also this like kind of male sidekick in the story, but that evangelicals actually like raise up as being the main character in that narrative somehow.
Really?
Yeah, wait, if we actually pull up the narrative, you'll see like closely to what Deborah said.
Is it Barak?
Yes.
Barak?
Yeah, that's what they do. Just whenever there's any male in a story that's about women, they just talk about the male. Speaking of, honestly, let's go from that to Ruth, the book of Ruth, and focusing all on Boaz.
So the book of Ruth is a relatively shorter book of the Bible, relatively shorter story, but again, very, very important to the greater Jesus story.
Yeah, one of the few books of the Bible that's actually named after a woman. Obviously not written by.
Yeah, and she is one of 5 women mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus, alongside Tamar, Rahab, the wife of Uriah, and then Mary, of course. So she's one of 5 women mentioned in that.
So what's cool is that, now that I'm thinking about it, would the book of Ruth, would the conversations between Naomi and Ruth pass the Bechdel test? Do you know what the Bechdel test is?
Yes, and for people that are unaware, the Bechdel test was something created by Alison Bechdel, who is the writer of such comics as Dykes to Watch Out For and Fun Home. And it was basically like there has to be 2 women in a story. Ideally, they both have names, and they have to be not talking about a man.
And they do, because just look here, Ruth 1, verse 16, but Ruth said to Naomi, "Do not press me to leave you or turn back from following you. Where you will go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die. There I will be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you." So that's just like them talking about their deep connection with one another. There we go. We have a book of the Bible that passes the Bechdel test.
Yeah, it's just seen as it's a story that, honestly, I didn't hear a lot growing up. I don't know if, were you, taught the book of Ruth?
Yeah, it's taught as, this love story. You want to find your Boaz. Boaz, by the way, is, okay, so it's not like Boaz is this one guy that Ruth falls in love with. No. Ruth was married actually to sorry, when I mentioned Naomi, I didn't even explain who this was. It's her mother-in-law. Yes, it's her mother-in-law. And it turns out that all of the sons of this mother die, and so you have these daughters-in-law and this woman that are now, because they have no men, they don't have any property, they don't have any way to support themselves. Because that's how it was in the Bible times. So they're like, oh, we need to be able to go somewhere in order to find a relative who will be the, I think the phrase that I heard was kinsman redeemer or something, or
Yeah, it says, since there was no heir to inherit Elimelech's land, custom required a close relative, usually the dead man's brother, to marry the widow of the deceased in order to continue the family line. And this was a law put into place in Deuteronomy. And this relative was called the Goel, the kinsman redeemer. Mm-hmm. And as Boaz was not Elimelech's brother, nor was Ruth his widow, scholars refer to the arrangement here as levirate-like.
Yeah, and so, there's so many interesting things about the way that Ruth is I guess, courting Boaz. I hate using that word, but, like, I mean, I don't know, it obviously it's, like, not dating, even though, okay, I have to say, in, like, one of the worst sermons that I have ever heard on this book, I was still attending, like, the evangelical church I grew up in, but though I was starting to deconstruct, so I was starting to get annoyed with some things, and of course one of them was, like, during the sermon on Ruth, he kept, like, we kept having this stupid metaphor that, like, Ruth and Boaz were on a date at Panera. I was like, you want to know what actually fucking happened? You want to know what actually fucking happened? Ruth went to the threshing floor and gave Boaz a fucking blowjob.
Yeah. Yes. I believe Rachel Held Evans, like, mentioned that in Your Biblical Womanhood. I've seen it mentioned somewhere.
It was Inspired. She mentioned she was.
Oh, it was Inspired. Sorry.
She was like, this is a euphemism for penis. Or I don't know if she directly said that. She kind of highly implied, though, that, like, the phrase that we're talking about. So Ruth goes to the threshing floor, and she was kind of given instructions by Naomi to do this, actually. She was like, okay, he'll tell you what to do. Go to the threshing floor at night. He'll tell you what to do. And so then Ruth touches his feet, quote unquote, which means she gave him a blowjob. Apparently.
I like how, like, that went to going on a date at Panera, which just seems to be the most Caucasian phrase I've ever heard in my entire life.
Yeah, I mean, they just don't. I mean, I it's understandable to not necessarily know that what touches his feet means, but.
But also, it's that thing of, like, it's taking this story that truly has so much more power to it and completely watering it down is such a powerful story. And one thing I was reading is it's kind of a story that highlights that not all of the laws in Deuteronomy and in Leviticus work in practice. And so this is one of those, in a way, the book is almost kind of a criticism of, like, hey, like, the law doesn't always work. Like, this is someone who broke the law, but still is such a big part of the Bible story.
That's another important thing to mention. She was a foreigner, and yet is in the lineage of Jesus, you know?
Yeah, and I know that in contemporary interpretations, I'm on Wikipedia, so thanks, Wikipedia, scholars have increasingly explored Ruth in ways which allow it to address contemporary issues. So in feminism, it's been recast as the story as one having the dignity of labor and female self-sufficiency, which fair, and also as a model for lesbian relationships, while others have seen it a celebration of the relationship between strong and resourceful women. So it's also, like, in contemporary literature and in women's and queer studies, it is interpreted in a variety of ways.
Mention the lesbian relationship part. I read the verse that was like a declaration of love from Ruth to Naomi, and whether that love is platonic or romantic, people are debating it.
Yeah, I was never taught this story. I just knew Ruth was kind of part of the lineage of Jesus, but I was never actually taught. This was a story I read much later on. I think honestly, I think as I started deconstructing, because I hadn't really read it, and if I had heard it, it was probably like a very whitewashed version of it. But again, it's taking this radical book and these radical stories and completely dumbing them down for their audience. Or at least this is what is done in evangelicalism, and there's so much more to the story than just, like, they went on a date at Panera, or it's like they fell in love or whatever. It's like, no.
Yeah, no, this was a business arrangement. I mean,
it was a business arrangement. Ruth probably gave Boaz a blowjob. So there is that. You know, it's not some little story.
Yeah. Also, I'm just realizing something we kind of forgot to say when talking about Proverbs 31 in terms of, like, being a verse to celebrate, or a passage to celebrate women. You know, an interesting thing that Rachel Held Evans discovered during her year of biblical womanhood, she became friends with this Orthodox Jewish woman named Ahava, and she, you know, they had a lot of email correspondence, and then sort of, I think Rachel was emailing Ahava being like, oh, what do you guys think about this Proverbs 31 verse? It drives me crazy, because she was trying to literally live it out for like a month, and she couldn't do it. Like, all of being described in there is just, like, you know, trying to reach perfection, and it's, like, impossible. And so then, like, you know, Ahava's response was like, well, that's not how Orthodox Jews interpret that. And she said how her husband sings the passage to her at the Sabbath meal every week. And so that's just such a more beautiful way to think about it, like that it's like we celebrate women for all of their achievements regardless of what they are. So the phrase used at the start of that passage, a capable wife who can find, and that is like really, really, really bad translation. I love the RSV, but that is so bad because that's women of valor. That's Eshet Hayil, and that's what that is what it means. It's translating to capable wife, but it's like, no, I mean it's a woman of virtue or a woman of valor. Those are the most correct translations of that phrase, I would say.
Yeah.
And it's also in Ahava talked about how in her culture, they use that phrase to sort of cheer each other on as women. They're like, oh, you just made a great meal, or you just had a baby, Eshet Hayil,
Yeah, and I think that's such a power, like it's so powerful to be able to do that, especially in a society, and not just in evangelicalism, but in greater society as a whole, where we're like women are kind of taught to be in competition or tear each other down, or it's seen as like women are catty and like you have to fight your way to the top and all these sorts of things, especially when it comes to hustle culture. To have it be that every time a woman accomplishes something, you say Eshet Chayil, and you say that they're a woman of valor, is incredible. Like I wish that had pervaded the culture rather than the submissive wife narrative.
Speaking of Bible stuff that is not talking about submissive wives, let's talk about Rahab.
Yes, let's talk about Rahab, who is another person that is mentioned in the lineage of Jesus. Again, one of 5 women mentioned.
Yeah. And she was a sex worker.
She was a sex worker. And just like the story of Deborah and Jael, the story of Rahab also takes place in the book of Judges, which again, book of Joshua, sorry, different J name. Book of Joshua, which is also
conquest, though.
another like pretty violent book in the Hebrew Bible. And she lived in Jericho. She was there when Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho and the walls came tumbling down. It's not that cute of a song once you learn the actual historical context of it. It's more like Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho, the walls came tumbling down, they killed every man, woman, and child behind the walls, except for the people in Rahab's house. BT dubs, Rahab was a sex worker. That's really the song that it should be, but instead it's a very cutesy, like, the walls came tumbling down sort of thing. But it's so much more brutal than that. And again, this is a woman that was exalted in she's exalted in the Jewish faith and in the Christian faith. She's in the direct lineage of Jesus. A lot of biblical interpreters have viewed Rahab as a model of hospitality, mercy, faith, patience, and repentance in her interaction with Joshua's spies.
She was able to protect the spies when they were in Jericho, right?
And it says
she would also be a foreigner then, because she's not an Israelite.
Yeah, and then there's Josephus, who is a 1st century Romano-Jewish historian, mentions that Rahab kept an inn, but is silent as to whether merely renting out rooms was her only source of income, as it was not uncommon for both an inn and a brothel to operate within the same building, thus entering Rahab's quarters was not necessarily a deviation from Joshua's orders. So again, like, even then it was seen as like, this is a pretty radical story.
Is there any woman in particular that you really want to talk about?
Ooh, I really want to talk about Hagar.
Yeah. Let's sing. Have you heard on the Evolving Faith or have you listened to the Evolving Faith podcast at all?
I have not. I have so many podcasts I need to listen to.
Well, Will Gaffney has a lot of interesting things to say about Hagar.
Oh, cool.
Probably also in her book, Womanist Midrash, she also probably has a lot of interesting things to say. From
That's awesome.
A womanist perspective, I think it's really interesting.
Yeah. So for people that are unfamiliar, I'm sure we've heard the story of Abraham and Sarah and how Abraham has a son named Isaac, and he's 100 when he's like 100 plus years old. Father Abraham also had many sons. Many sons had Father Abraham. That whole thing. But before Abraham and Sarah became the people that we know and love today, they were Abram and Sarai. So this was before their name was changed by God. And Hagar was Sarai's slave, and she gave birth to Abram's firstborn child, Ishmael. And just so we're clear, Sarai treated her absolutely terribly because she had her husband's child. And she was beaten. She was just treated absolutely brutally. And so one morning, Hagar ended up escaping with Ishmael into the desert, and God heard her and her son crying and came to rescue them. So God came to rescue this woman who the rest of society would not have cared about. Like, she was this slave woman who had just given birth to her master's husband's child. And again, like, the topic of consent isn't even like a thing. So she was probably like raped or sexually assaulted by him, because I again, it's not explicitly mentioned. I just have a strong feeling for the time the book was written that this was not a consensual birth. But it's just amazing that that's who God revealed themselves to, is a woman who no one else would have cared about.
Because Hagar,
at
I
that
guess
point.
Hagar tries to escape with the baby and goes out into the desert, right? And that's where God reveals God's self to Hagar.
Yeah, Abram gave Hagar bread and water, and then like was just peace out, and sent them out into the desert and to the wilderness. And as like her and her son were basically on the brink of dehydration, God came to rescue them, and the angel opened Hagar's eyes, and she saw a well of water, and also told Hagar that God would make a great nation of Ishmael. So a lot of times people really only look at the story of Abraham and Isaac and that lineage, but there was also a great nation made from Ishmael as well. And I know that in the Quran, it is Allah who commands Abraham to take Hagar and Ishmael into the desert and leave them there. And I know that Ishmael and Hagar are a lot more important in Islam than they are in the Bible, though they're important, but at least they're not mentioned as much. But yeah, it's like there's this whole other side to the Bible that is so powerful that people seem to forget. I think I was always taught that like, oh, Hagar like was almost like disposable in a way, like, which is terrible.
But she has this powerful moment, right? She's like, correct me if I'm wrong, she says like, I have seen the one who sees me, or yeah,
and like think of how powerful that is that God was the one who saw her, like, and she her master, and like her master didn't see her, Abraham didn't see her, no one saw this woman who, again, the rest of society just wouldn't have given two hoots about, but God the divine is the one who sees her. And I think that harkens to a bigger narrative that God sees the people that everyone else seems to forget about, or that people don't care about. And it's something that's really been on my heart lately, as we've seen so many awful things happen, like not just in the US, but all over the world. It's like, it's that reminder that God sees them too. It's been a little bit infuriating to see, like, there are certain Christian accounts on Instagram that will post about, like, the Christian church in Afghanistan is going to be destroyed, which, like, yes, that is a thing to be terrified about, but they never mention the majority of women who are Muslim. They always only mention, like, the Christian faith, which is, again, like, that's something to be concerned about.
They don't mention the translators that are trying to, the U.S. is not, I haven't actually read the most updated things, but in general, I mean, there are a lot of, like, translators that really helped us out during the war that are just being left there to probably be assassinated because they helped the U.S. And it's just really, really hard to think about, and really hard to think about all of the women whose opportunities are going to be taken away.
And it's that notion that God sees them too. Like, even if the rest of the world and, like, they're like, my God, like, Afghanistan's own government just, like, left. They were like, bye, and just dropped everything and ran. Like, God sees that. God sees that atrocity, and God sees the women who are left behind. And, it's just...
I feel like that happens with, actually, like, that theme happens with a lot of stories with women in the Bible. Now that I'm thinking
because I was actually about to bring up the woman the unnamed woman at the well. She was a woman who was, again, would have probably not been considered the shining beacon of femininity in the society she lived
Samaritan, which means that she was also like a foreigner to Jesus, like in relation
Yeah.
to Jesus.
Yeah, and in a sense they were sworn, like the Jewish people and Samaritans were like sworn enemies. That's also why, and this is something we can maybe talk about in another episode, why the story of the Good Samaritan is such a radical story, because the one that rescues the man on the side of the road isn't his own people, but it's someone who is his neighbor, as the Bible says, someone who probably wouldn't be very well liked by the Jewish people, but that's the one who saves the man on the side of the road. But likewise with the woman at the well, she was Samaritan. It's also very much implied that she had multiple, like, I have heard many different interpretations for
what I need to do right now.
So please,
let me just literally get out inspired, because she talks about this, and I know like some people might just be like, y'all are obsessed with Rachel Held Evans, and honestly the answer to that is yes, but I mean she really does like say so much theology in like such an approachable way, you know, and so like that's why I reference her a lot. And anyway, let me go get the book. Yeah, so the interesting thing is, in Inspired, Rachel does these, like, sections that are, like, sort of, you know, creative reinterpretations of certain stories. One of them is called The Well. So, let me find it here. Oh, yeah, so it's possible, the way that Rachel interprets it, I should say, after 4 weddings and 4 tragedies, like, that's one of the key phrases that, that's mentioned. So she seems to interpret that for some reason all of her former husbands died, which, you know, that's something that happened in the Hebrew Bible, as we just saw. We saw that, you know, Ruth was a widow, and so and you know, it's like in order to in the society, in order to maintain a sense of like security as a woman, you had to keep marrying in some capacity, usually probably like their brothers or something. And so it's saying that she's living in her father-in-law's house, and so that's why Jesus said the one you live with now is not one of them, because it's the father-in-law. So that's an interesting way to interpret the story.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it kind of harkens back to like Jesus sees this woman that the rest of society might not have cared about. They maybe despised her, and said, revealed his divinity, and said, I am the one, or like, I am he, like revealing that he is the. And
then she like
goes back. She
goes back to her town and is like, you know, this man told me everything I ever did. He like, when she said it, it's sort of like, oh, he saw me, like all of me, instead of just like a part of me.
It's one of those stories that again it gets told like. I feel like I learned this story in like youth group at Sunday school and stuff, but it's so watered down, when the actual narrative of the story is so much greater. Is again, God sees this person.
Yeah. And also another sort of story in the Gospels where Jesus really sees a woman, the woman with the problem of blood. I'm going to look at it, I think, from Luke. Let me pull it up. Yeah, so what's interesting though, actually, what's interesting is a French translation. Let me actually look that up. When I was in Paris, I attended a French-speaking church, and so, you know, this one time, we were, the pastor is preaching from Luke 8, and from the Bible Second 21 version of the Bible, there's...
What does that mean in English for the people that don't speak French?
Well, I mean, okay, so it's... I think Second is just maybe the name of like someone, last name of someone.
Okay. And
then 21 is 21, which it doesn't refer to the year because it wasn't created this year. I don't know if it refers to the version. I don't know, but
okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, 21 is 21, but yeah, and so the verse is the specific verse I'm thinking about. So you know, this woman, she knows that if she just touches the cloak of Jesus, that she will be healed, and so she just reaches out and like she feels that. I should probably explain what she's going to be healed from, because that's the most important thing about the story. This woman has been bleeding for, I believe, 12 years, and it just hasn't stopped. Doctors haven't been able to figure out what's wrong with her. And in that society, this made her literally untouchable, because the Israelites had rules related to, that are laid out in the Hebrew Bible about what makes someone ritually, or even just in general, like clean or unclean, and a lot of it had to do with body fluids. And so if like a woman couldn't be touched by her husband while she was on her period, and so given that she was bleeding just continually, that meant that she couldn't participate in temple worship. She couldn't or temple worship, synagogue, or in any case, she couldn't participate in worship, and she if she had a husband, he was not allowed to touch her. And in society, she would have been looked down upon. And so, she really wants to be healed of this, to be able to actually participate in society. And, at that moment, when she touches Jesus' cloak, her bleeding stops. And then Jesus says, "Who touched me?" And of course, that's like the disciples, when he asked this, they're like, literally everyone is touching you. You're surrounded on all sides. Like, why are you asking this?
Like, imagine that pandemonium, too, of people just surrounding Jesus and everything, just wanting to be killed.
There's the song in Jesus Christ Superstar. Would you heal me?
Yeah, like, see my eyes, I can hardly see. We need to do a musical episode. Anyways.
We will.
Also, we will. Tony season next year. But if also I recall correctly, because I'm reading through Luke right now, is he heals this woman on the way to go bring that little girl back from dead Jairus' daughter.
I need to get to the actual point of why I brought up the French.
Yes.
So, okay, it'll be interesting to see.
Oh my gosh, please do, yeah.
Yeah, so, okay, verse 47, I will obviously say the English translation after this, but voyant qu'elle n'était pas passée inaperçue. So, seeing that she hadn't passed by unperceived. What does 47 start with in the Bible that you're reading?
In the New Living Translation, that verse says, "When the woman realized that she could not stay hidden, she began to tremble and fell to her knees in front of him. The whole crowd heard her explain why she had touched him and that she had been immediately healed."
Yeah, so it's interesting. It is interesting, that translation, right? Seeing that she hadn't passed by unperceived. And, like, the pastor actually sort of talked about that part of the verse a lot. He was like, it's like in this, like, Jesus sort of, by asking who touched me, Jesus, like, saw this woman. Jesus acknowledged her. And I think, like, the way that verse is translated into the French really, like, highlights that, I guess. So that's really interesting, I think. And fits with the sort of theme that we kind of were talking about.
Yeah, that's Yeah, and again, that through line of someone who was probably very much ignored by greater society, Jesus, again, sees and feels some of his healing power be released, which, again, I feel like the Bible is so much, again, with the context it was written in, of course, the Bible is so much more feminist than people want to admit, but it's been so bastardized.
You know what bogs it down, though? We're ways into this. People are probably surprised that we haven't talked about Paul yet.
Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh. Because, again, so many stories of women in the Bible. But, yeah. So, one thing, here's what I will say about Paul. And, like, we'll go more to this as well. Paul, dude, I love some of the things he wrote. But then he writes some things, and I'm like, dude, what are you saying?
The thing is that it just, like, okay, let's talk about Paul. Okay, sort of a weird phrase, but quote unquote Paul's women. That is, women that are mentioned by Paul in his letters. So there is
sounds like Charlie's Angels.
So there is Phoebe. Let's actually find the verse in Romans where she's mentioned, because the way that he says it implies that she is the person who's supposed to read the letter to the congregation. So, "I commend to you our sister Phoebe, a deacon of the church at Cenchreae, so that you may welcome her in the Lord as is fitting for the saints, and help her in whatever way she may require from you, for she has been a benefactor of many and of myself as well." So, like, yeah, he's like, I commend to you. Like, this person is going to be helping y'all out.
Yeah.
Like, and a lot of people like to say that deacon is just like servant or something, but no, like.
Try telling that to a deacon of the Catholic Church that they're a servant. Like, it's perhaps a servant of a divine creator, but, like, it's no. Like, this is someone who was one of the heads of the early church.
Yeah.
But sure, women shouldn't serve. Like, okay, evangelicalism.
Also, just a little, like, interesting random bit as long as we're talking about Paul and women. So, he has a sister and a nephew that he doesn't even bother to mention the names of. He just mentions her in passing, like, once.
Ugh, rude.
I know! When I read that, I was like, what? You're really not gonna, like, you mentioned the names of so many
I know. Well, I know that Paul says, like, again, Paul's kind of the one that was like, women, I forbid a woman to teach, or, again, women must submit. But at the same time, like, again, he's talking to Timothy, who is one of the people he writes letters to, and Timothy's great faith and great mission work he was raised by his mother and his grandmother to be this person. Like, Timothy wouldn't have been a person of great importance if not for his mother and grandmother teaching him the gospel.
Also, wait, is Priscilla ever mentioned by Paul in his letters? I don't know if she is, but let's just talk about Priscilla.
Let me...
Did you know there's a theory that Priscilla is the author of Hebrews, which I think is really cool. A lot of people just assume it's Paul. Go on.
That's so cool. I've never heard that before.
It's on.
That's
amazing.
amazing.
On the Wikipedia page for the Book of Hebrews. You look up the Wikipedia page for the Book of Hebrews. It talks about that theory. So.
Yeah.
Because, like,
also, I know that she's mentioned, because I'm on Wikipedia right now too. She's mentioned in Acts quite a bit, and Romans at the butt end of Romans when he's like saying, "Say hi to all these women that are preachers."
Yeah. Right.
She's also mentioned in 1 Corinthians and 2 Timothy. Yeah.
So yeah, when you're looking at this part on authorship, I mean, like, I think when I read the Book of Hebrews, I don't really think it sounds like Paul. You know. Like, I just think, especially because, like, wait, doesn't it, like, how does it start out? Let me see. Yeah, it doesn't start out with the greeting that Paul always starts out with in his letters. Like, he always is like, grace and peace to you, and that's not here, so, yeah, so it probably wasn't him, and so, oh, okay. There is this thing on Wikipedia. Oh, why you gotta write on my parade Wikipedia? Despite some theories of Hebrews being authored by Priscilla, a majority of scholars hold that the author was presumably male since he refers to himself using a masculine participle in 1132. Okay, but, like, that might just be because she wanted to appear as like a man. That doesn't really mean anything.
Or whoever was translating the Bible was like, he's a guy, and you know it could have very well been changed as the Bible was being put together. Because I know that Junia, for a long time, people thought that Junia was a man.
Woman. Yeah, because
oh my gosh.
Okay, so they changed, some translations changed Junia to Junius, which technically in the Greek is a male name, but it was literally never used. Like, you can't find a lot of literary references to a Junius anywhere, whereas you can find plenty of references to Junia throughout Greek literature. Like, not, you know, that person specifically, but to the name. Yeah, but because, of course, the thing about Junia being a woman being problematic for the conservative folks is that she's mentioned as being an apostle, right?
Yeah, and one thing that is said, some translators have rendered the name Junius, but it seems clear that there's a quote that says, "Indeed, how great the wisdom of this woman must have been that she was even deemed worthy of the title apostle." Like, yeah, she's very much considered an apostle, and some people think, oh no, she was just really good friends with the apostles, but a lot of people considered her an apostle.
Speaking of apostles who don't, who get squashed down to not be apostles, Mary Magdalene, baby.
Oh, yeah. And again, someone else who was, again, has the divinity of God and Jesus revealed to her after Jesus' crucifixion. Her and her friends, I think they're the other women. There's Salome, and
there's probably a lot of them, honestly.
And Joanna. Like, there were a lot of women, but I know that a few of them were named. That's who Jesus reveals himself to after the resurrection. And
So what's important is that they are the only ones who, like, stand by him as he is crucified. Like, all the male disciples are like, peace out, they go, you know, and then, like, these women actually stand by, watch as he is crucified, weep and mourn for him. They were probably helping with the burial. I guess it doesn't really say a lot about that, but, I mean, they also, I mean, I'm assuming they did that because then in a few days, they went to, like, they were, you know, expecting to anoint him with, some, you know, burial spices.
Yeah, and I know that in the Apocrypha, there are a lot more writings that mention Mary Magdalene, as well as some believe that Mary Magdalene might have written a gospel as well of some kind, which I don't know. I feel like that would be
there is a piece of apocryphal literature that is titled, not necessarily really attributed to her, but titled
right, yeah,
Magdalene. I think it's one of like the Gnostic ones though, so it's a little weird, but
yeah, the Gospel of Mary is the only surviving apocryphal text named after a woman, contains information about the role of women in the early church. It's not attributed to her. The author is anonymous, but again, there are so many more apocryphal books that go into the role of women in the early church. And again, whether or not you take the apocryphal texts as truth, or whether you believe parts of them or not all of them, or you may think, oh, certain ones were written a bit too late, which they weren't that late. Like, some of them were like 50, 60 years too late. Anyways, it's always like, it's good food for thought, and I think it also sheds insight into how, like, the world was at that point. So whether or not you believe that, up to you. Also, I think it's extra to learn about, which I think is awesome.
An interesting thing that was pointed out, I forget exactly who wrote it. It was something that Rachel Held Evans linked to in one of her blog posts. Fun fact, I'm like reading through all of her blog posts bit by bit.
Oh,
right now I'm in February 2012. Anyway, so, you know, this person, like, she quoted mentioned that, you know, in Luke, I believe it is, or he refers to the 12 Jewish men chosen by Jesus to sort of be his disciples as the 12. And then there's also this group of people that Luke constantly refers to called the women. And he uses that phrase basically in the same way to refer to, like, these followers of Jesus that were always with Jesus. So, you know, and I feel like he doesn't necessarily, I mean, he makes the distinction, I guess, based on gender, but not necessarily, I feel like he treats those groups as equals, though.
Yeah, and again, it's unfortunate that this is a through line. Another woman who's very, very important to the greater Jesus story, who's just kind of seen as, oh, one of the female followers. Or one thing I was always taught was like, oh, Mary Magdalene was like a harlot, or she was like a prostitute, or she had demons or whatever.
So let's talk about that. There are two very similar stories in the Bible. One mentions Mary Magdalene, one does not. Oh, of course, what's just coming up is, like, again, the misconception that story is Mary Magdalene, but I swear that there's something, okay, there's also something in Mark where, again, it's not really, it doesn't say that it's Mary Magdalene. In John it says that it's, actually, this is Mary Bethany. What the fuck? This is Mary Bethany. Right, it says 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. Yeah, and I guess there are... Yeah, it's a similar story, but also, what I'm really confused about is that this is Mary Bethany, which, okay, I'll be honest, I did think that, like, Mary Bethany and Mary Magdalene were, like, kind of the same person until, like, this year, maybe.
Okay. That's fair. Like, there are a lot of Marys in the New Testament.
Yeah, there are more. I think there are, like, two more after. So, there's obviously Mary Magdalene, Mary Bethany, Mary, the mother of Jesus. But there are, like, two more. When I was looking at this big-ass list of, like, women in the Bible, I saw that there were, like, two more, but I just didn't really click on them to see who they were. Oh, also, I just realized when we talked about Priscilla maybe being the author of Hebrews, I didn't really talk about who she is. Let's do that. So her husband, Aquila, and her together, they led a church together. And it pretty damn equally. Like, I think Acts says that they're, pretty equal footing in terms of running a church gathering at their house. And honestly, there are, like, so many women that just run church gatherings at their house. Like, several of the women we have on our list here, that's, like, what they fall under. Like, for example, Lydia. She is a successful businesswoman because it says that she sells purple cloth, which was ridiculously expensive in that time period.
Yeah.
And, she ends up opening up, I believe she opens up a ministry for widows. I recently read the book, For All Who Hunger by Emily Scott, and she talked about that, I think. So, I'm not sure. But in any case, I think she was hospitable to Paul and the other missionaries who were with him. In the early church in Acts, and also you can sort of see mentions of this in Paul's letters, and actually, part of why, we'll get into it, but part of why Paul says, I do not allow women to speak in church. There were so many widows joining the early church. Like, an enormous amount, to the point where, like, part of Paul's letters is just dealing with, like, hey, y'all need to, like, donate some money because there are, like, so many widows that need to be taken care of here.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to think about. We've been talking about how, so many of these women in the Hebrew Bible sort of were compromised because, like, they needed to, like, find these ways to secure financial status for themselves. And this, the church was making a way that was completely outside of any of that. They were like, if you have no more male relatives left, we will still support you. And that's really cool. And so getting to, the sort of bad things that Paul says about women in his letters, a lot of them are actually referring to, like, groups of widows. Well, I guess not all of them, because, there's I guess some of the verse, like, relating to, like, a lot of women were, like, asking questions during the services, and to the point where it was getting really disruptive, and so Paul was like, the women kind of ask their husbands questions at home. Though, of course, now that I think about it, I'm like, did Paul consider that some of the people raising questions don't have husbands to ask questions to?
Yeah. It's just so interesting. It's like, and it's sad that one thing I always like to remember is that Paul's letters were that. They were letters. Yeah. They weren't doctrine. They weren't law. They were letters he wrote to people that were starting churches. I don't think that, and again, they were written for a very specific time in a very specific place, and glean what you will from them, whatever makes your life better. Romans chapter 12 is probably one of my favorite chapters in the Bible, but it's not a rule book. I think you've said this before, it's descriptive, not prescriptive.
Yeah, and I'm also finding there's a verse where, like, Paul is talking about, women should, like, dress this way. And, like, basically why he's saying that is because there were a lot of wealthy widows. I guess I don't quite know how they were wealthy, but, there are a lot of wealthy widows or older women who are, like, really just flaunting their wealth at these gatherings. And so actually, like, when he says modest, he's kind of referring to, like, you shouldn't be dressing in a way that's, like, trying to one-up everyone around you, and feel bad. So there's that.
Yeah, I never saw it that way. Because, again, it's so much of these letters have been, like, the background and the hermeneutics don't matter. It's like they've been bastardized to the point where dressing modestly means, these arbitrary rules of cover your shoulders and your knees. And, like, I know that there are some conservative people on YouTube, cough cough, girl defined, that make lots of videos on
hottest fashionable modest outfits.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Or doing your makeup in a God-honoring way. Like, God does not care what I'm putting on my eyelids. I mean, maybe he does if I have an allergic reaction, but then again, like, I don't think he cares that much.
Maybe he does if it's been tested on animals. Maybe.
That's my thought. There's so many great cruelty-free brands nowadays. Anyways, that's what it's been turned into. Is like how to dress, and if you don't dress this way, then you're a bad Christian. And again, it's this sort of cultural thing that has pervaded its way into secular culture too. Like, so many schools have those rules of, like, you can't wear spaghetti straps, you can't wear crop tops to school, you can't. I remember I would get in trouble for wearing, like, granny berets to school because those were in style. back in the mid 2000s. Please don't judge me. But I got in trouble for wearing those, but then you'd see other people, like, wearing, like, really tiny clothes, like, clothes that were very much against the dress code be let off the hook. Like, it was very, and again, it was usually, again, not a lot of guys would get dress coded, but girls would. And I noticed that if the girl wasn't considered conventionally attractive, she was a lot more likely to get dress coded. And again, that's something that Paul said that probably wasn't a rule for us nowadays. It was probably a rule for rich widows, as you were saying.
Yeah.
And that's how it's made its way not only into the evangelical world, but into the secular world as well. Because, like, these were rules in my public high school. Not even in my, because my private school we wore uniforms, but in my public high school these were rules.
Speaking of passages that have been just, like, interpreted in the absolutely most wrong way, let's talk about Lot's daughters. In the Genesis 19, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, they are very often forgotten in the discussion of this passage.
Yeah, it's one of those, like, I feel like a lot of times you have people who are evangelical saying that we're cherry picking the Bible. This is one of those times where cherry picking is being done on the other side as well, because they're like, ooh, Sodom and Gomorrah got destroyed because of homosexuality, which it wasn't. But then people seem to forget that, one, Lot offers up his virgin daughters to this ravenous crowd. Yeah. And then they're like, oh man, we need like to pass on, like, our dad's lineage, and they get him drunk, and I don't even know how to best word it, honestly, because to say that they, like, slept with him does not sound like...
They fucked him. Just very detached, in the most detached way.
Yeah, like, they got their dad drunk, and were like, we're gonna continue the Lot bloodline, and it's just, yeah. People just don't tend to when they bring up Sodom and Gomorrah and the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, they do not bring that up.
They also don't usually bring up, like, the fact that his wife turns into a pillar of salt because she looked back. She was punished for looking back at where she had lived her whole life. Maybe, like, you know.
Yeah, it's such a weird story. But again, it's
an interesting thing. In the book Boy Erased by Gerard Conley, he sort of turns this passage completely on his head by sort of talking about.
Oh, okay.
He talks about how, you know, memories are, well, I guess the way to say this, he sort of interweaves his own story with this story by talking about his own experience of sexual assault, and talking about how, you know, memories around sexual assault get fuzzy.
So I actually read in the book Bible, Gender, Sexuality that was actually seen as the consent. There's no consent. He literally just says, take my 2 virgin daughters, is because it was seen as, like, house guests were seen with such esteem that they were going to protect those house guests at all costs. Angels are not. That's what a righteous person would do, is they would protect their house guests. And so and especially with male house guests, because males were seen as, like, dominant, and they don't want to be defiled or made submissive. It was like, I'll give you people that are already going to be submissive, and it won't tarnish them, and it won't tarnish you, and does not make it any better. But I know that was written in the book Bible, Gender, Sexuality, which is a great book, and I think it's in our resource list now as well.
But I guess I was just, I mean, the way that he talks about it, I guess in his interpretation, he does, like, sort of, like, imagine it that they were, like, I'm trying to see in the passage, do they come inside? I'm sorry, I'm trying to...
They don't come inside, but they try to, like, break down the door and break down the walls, and then the angels blind the crowd as they're about to.
Yeah, well, I guess then maybe what he's doing is, like, he's still turning the text on his head by considering, like, this as a narrative still, like, focused on sexual assault and not, you know, on, like, homosexuality, because that's not what it's about. Anyway. And just, you know, this is one of those situations where I really hate that this passage was obviously written by a man, because, of course, like, none of this trauma that they've gone through, because even, like, you know, those men pounding on the door, those men, and then their own father just being so willing to completely give them up. I can't imagine the fear.
Yeah.
I can't imagine, like, the trauma of that situation. And then after that, like, having to... I mean, they didn't have to do it, but it's so weird. This is technically a decision that they made, I guess, but, you know, it's like after that, after knowing that your father would just give you over, having to, like, fuck him, it just...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's such a... I think Rachel Held Evans said it best, is if you've read the entire Bible and say that you understand it, you've probably never read the entire Bible. And likewise, you can't, if you read the Bible and, like, you're not at all disturbed by any part of it, then that's why you've clearly not fully read the Bible.
Let's talk about women that are traditionally considered to be evil. And, you know, in some places that's maybe the case. Like, there's Herodias, who, like, ordered John the Baptist's head on a silver platter. That's not really nice. Let's talk about Jezebel, though.
The favorite buzzword / insult of
you've got a Jezebel
old white
spirit.
men. What does that even mean?
Let's see. What book is this in?
So Jezebel really appears in the book of 1 Kings. She is the wife of Ahab. And this is in the, like, stories of Elijah. And his time as a prophet. And Jezebel is introduced into the biblical narrative as a Phoenician princess, the daughter of Ithabal, first king of Tyre. Said she was Sidonian, which is a biblical term for Phoenicians in general. I realized I started reading, like, genealogy and stuff, and I'm like, that's not why we're here. I was like, oof, okay. And they were, basically, Jezebel and Ahab were worshippers of Baal, Baal.
And Asherah, which...
Asherah.
Asherah poles are, like, phallic symbols, so...
And this was one of those moments where it was, like, in the story, like, Elijah is like, my God can beat up your gods, and they were like, okay. And so they have a challenge on Mount Carmel, and the challenge is to see which god, Yahweh or Baal, would burn a bull sacrifice on an altar. Jezebel's prophets failed to summon Baal in burning the bull sacrifice despite their cries and cutting themselves. Ooh! Elijah, however, succeeded when he summoned Yahweh, impressing the Israelites. And then he orders the people to seize and kill the prophets of Baal and Asherah at the Kishon River. And Jezebel is very angry and swears to have Elijah killed.
Yeah, well, that's not really nice either. But also, there's this... Okay, yeah, there is... I wonder what the connection is between, like, Jezebel and, like, the sexuality sort of... Like, that she's, you know, this horror figure...
Yeah. So one thing that I'm reading right here, it says, in Christian lore, a comparison to Jezebel suggested that a person was a pagan or an apostate masquerading as a servant of God. By manipulation and seduction, she misled the saints of God into sins of idolatry and sexual immorality. So it's basically she's like the reason why people say causing your brothers to stumble. If you do that, you're a Jezebel.
Right. Okay.
And the Jezebel stereotype is an oppressive image and was used as justification for sexual assault and sexual servitude during the eras of colonization and slavery in the United States. So, again, taking a historical thing and making it terrible for other people. It's just...
Speaking of sexualized characters, this might be one of the last ones before we sort of start to wrap up here. Bathsheba.
Yeah.
A common sort of... Well, actually, you know, thankfully I wasn't taught this, but I know, you know, in the past, like, conservative Christians have definitely taught this, that, like, Bathsheba was, you know, responsible. She was, you know, responsible for making David lust because she was, like, on this rooftop bathing naked, which I guess I'm not quite sure whether that was a common practice or not, but in any case, it wouldn't be her fault, you know? And, you know, King David sees this woman, and he's like, I want her, and so he rapes her, and then he ends up having her husband killed. Yeah, and the thing is that God gets mad about this. This prophet Nathan comes and is like, hey, God is mad at you and is going to punish you for what you did. So...
Yeah.
So it's like...
I know, because it's not Bathsheba's fault. Yeah, like, she was just chilling out, bathing on her roof, and David's the one that was lusting after her and committed these atrocities towards her and her husband. Like, again, it's always seen as like, ooh, Bathsheba, ooh, she's like so bad, but it's like, no, like she's not. She was just chilling. Also, this is where we get the VeggieTales classic, King George and the Ducky. That is what that's what it's based off of, because they...
Lord, why do they, like, turn these... Like, they like to turn, like, the most weird and violent and sexual Bible stories into, like, these watered-down things, you know? Like...
Yeah, and it's like, you had to tell this story? Like, what? Okay. Yeah, it's just very interesting that these women who were very powerful and, like, are written to have, like, ooh, they had this power over a man. It's like, most of the time these women were just kind of, you know, living their lives, and it only gets messed up when men end up in the picture, and specifically men in power enter the picture. And I think also the reason that people don't bring up this story with David and, like, Bathsheba is people see David as kind of this, like, he was a product of his time, of course, what with all the concubines, but he was a perfect character, and
he's the hero
suggest
of the Hebrew Bible.
Yeah, and like he, you know, kills Goliath and everything. Yeah, and so to have him in this story where he's very clearly the villain, that just goes against that narrative that David's perfect and that David is, again, an ascendant of Jesus.
Yeah, but to be very clear, you know, it says after that happens that there's a prophet that is like, hey, you're going to be punished for this. So the narrative itself blames David. Anyway, so I think we're going to wrap up here. A few quick notes. If you want to hear about Rizpah, I didn't mention her because honestly, in the Evolving Faith podcast episode with Austin Channing Brown, she says things way better than I can. She talks about it from this, you know, an African American woman perspective in a way that's just really, really powerful. So please check that out. And then if you want to hear more about Esther and Queen Vashti, the way that Rachel Held Evans talks about it in Inspired, I think is really cool. So
yeah, and I think we definitely might need to do a second episode on women in the Bible, because there's so many amazing stories.
Yeah, or like, I mean, I feel like in some of our Bible Deck deep dives we'll be getting into that. Like, I'm sure we will do like an episode on Esther at some point.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun doing this.
Yeah, this was definitely a big research project to take on, and I'm very grateful for it. But yeah, before we wrap up, highlight of the week?
Honestly, I'm just glad that it's September and I can get fall-themed drinks at cafes now.
You know what? That's an awesome highlight. I am not a huge pumpkin spice gal, but I am liking the, what's it, like the apple macchiato, like the apple spice macchiato. I just had
that today. I had the apple crisp macchiato from Starbucks.
Yes, that's what it's called. It's so good, and it's really good hot, and it's really good with blonde espresso. Anyways, that's like a great thing to celebrate. That's awesome. My highlight of this week, or over the last week, was I got into a local choir, which I'm very excited about. Yeah, and for people that are listening that don't know this about me, I teach music to toddlers. So over the last year, my musical outlet has become synonymous with work. And I'm very glad to be able to have a musical outlet that has nothing to do with my job. And I get to sing, and I also have missed group singing a lot. So I'm very, very excited to be in this choir.
That's so cool.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, I guess, Anna, do you want to let them know about all the different things we got going on?
Yes, absolutely. So, best ways to support us. One, we're on Patreon. So if you have even $1 or $2 to spare, we greatly appreciate that. We have some fun perks available. So if you want to donate to our Patreon, if you have the funds and are able to do so, we would greatly appreciate that. That being said, though, if you can leave a review on Apple Podcasts, stream on Spotify, wherever podcasts can be listened to, that is so helpful in boosting the algorithm, especially leaving ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts. And also you can follow us on all of our social media. We're on Instagram and Twitter, and now we're on Facebook. And I think it's only been requested once or twice, but we do have audio recordings of this podcast on YouTube. So if you know someone that doesn't have streaming services, they can listen to new episodes on YouTube. They're uploaded the same time as our episodes on all the other streaming platforms.
Also, wait, did you mention the resource list? Or
I did not.
Okay. We recently uploaded a resource list on a Google Drive that you can view with the link. I think it's on our link tree. Is it added yet, or
It will be
by the time
before this episode goes live.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, right now it's just LGBTQ resources. Maybe it can be a thing where like we have separate lists by topic. I guess we'll eventually going to come out with maybe some more resource lists. Because I'm a bit of a librarian. I love like compiling all the resources. Yeah.
And again, of course, whenever we mention a resource in an episode, we'll tag it in the episode post and everything. That way, you know exactly what we're listing. But you can always look up books related to or past things we've shared through this resource list as well. Also, we have a bunch of great podcasts on there, some of which are by some of our very dear friends. So definitely check those out.
Yeah, well, we'll see you next time. We're going to be interviewing one of my best friends, Brianna Da Silva, so I'm really excited about it.
Yes, and Brianna was actually the designer of our fabulous logo, so we are very excited to have her on the show.
Well, we'll see y'all.
See y'all later.